She sat in a cafe, sipping her coffee and staring out of the window. The blood-stained knife lay next to her handbag, hidden beneath her red woolen scarf. "Here's your bill for a cafe Americano. Would you like anything else, ma'am?" the waiter asked. She shook her head and pulled out the money from her purse. Suddenly, the waiter glanced at the bag and hesitated. "Is that a knife?" he asked. "You should mind your own business," she snapped, handing him the money. But it wasn't just the waiter and her in the cafe, it was also me. I had been watching her for the last 10 minutes. You know how people are in Starbucks, always interesting to observe. As she was about to leave the table, I stopped her. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "Why can't people just mind their own business?" she retorted. "Actually, I am. I'm a writer, and maybe your story will spark an idea for me." "Are you J.K. Rowling?" she asked. "Not J.K., but I'm Charles Watson. And you?" I don't usually talk to strangers, but through talking, strangers can become friends. "Trust me, tell me your story." "Okay, sit down. But first, tell me something about yourself, then I'll share mine." I sat down beside her and said, "I'm Charles. Like a lot of writers, I studied something else first, economics, but I've always wanted to write. I've written 2 novels, and now I'm looking for publishers here in London." "So, what's your story?" "Watson, you're British, right?" she asked. I nodded. I've never understood why people are always curious about where you're from. There are so many other things to know about someone. I'm Emma Davies, an English girl born and raised in Manchester. I live there with my family. My mom, dad, aunt, and my older brother, Daniel. My mom was a homemaker, and being a homemaker doesn't mean she had no work. In fact, she had more work than anyone else. No set hours, she worked around the clock. I always loved her roast dinners and shepherd's pie. And for me, forget about Coke or Pepsi. The best drink in the world is a cold glass of lemonade. My dad drove a cab around Manchester, but it didn't make much, and that's why we were a middle-class family. Manchester is my favorite city, and I loved visiting Old Trafford Stadium. My mom and I often went there, not for football, but for events and gatherings. My dad was always busy working, so we rarely saw him. My Aunt Margaret, or Aunt Maggie as I called her, was a widow. She lost her husband, my uncle, who I never got to meet. He passed away before I was born. He was in the army and died in action. I've only ever seen pictures of him. My brother, Daniel, was always good at helping me with my studies, especially math, which I hated. But math was Daniel's favorite subject. I remember him quoting his teacher. "You have to play with numbers, otherwise they'll play with you." That was my childhood. But as I grew up, everything started to change. When I was in year 10, Daniel left for university in London. One day, my mom went shopping, and my dad was working as usual. I asked Aunt Maggie, "Why didn't you ever remarry after Uncle passed away?" "There's no one like the first one," Aunt Maggie replied. I was too young to understand then. She continued, "What guarantee is there that the next person will live longer than me? Death is the only certainty in life. It's better to live in the memories of one person than to chase after fleeting happiness." I missed Daniel a lot, but he was busy with his studies. This was before mobile phones were common, so he'd call home from a phone booth once a week. One evening, Mom made my second favorite dish, chicken curry. She sighed. "Daniel hasn't called in over a week." I nodded. "Can we visit him?" she asked. "I heard parents aren't allowed in university halls," I replied. "Still, I miss him so much," she said. "I miss him too, Mom. But don't worry, I'm here. I'll never leave you." But I was wrong. Time changes everything. And soon I had to leave for my own studies. I cried the day before I left. "Dad, I don't want to leave home. I want to stay here with you. Emma, I never had the chance to study, and that's why I drive a cab. But you need to study. Don't end up like us. Go and make something of yourself." Dad encouraged me. Because of him, I went to London to study medicine. In London, I made friends: Sarah, Emily, Jack, Sam, and Rachel. But my closest friends were Jack and Rachel. Rachel was tall and pretty, with short hair. Jack wasn't particularly handsome, but he was clever, with glasses that gave him a smart look. I started a new chapter of my life with them. By the time I finished my first year of medical school, Daniel had completed his degree and had been recruited by a top company in Switzerland. It was great news, but I was torn. He was going far away again. It was during my holidays when Daniel left for Switzerland. Before he left, he gave me a special gift, a parrot. Yes, a real parrot with green feathers. It was the most beautiful bird I'd ever seen. "When you miss me, just look at this," Daniel said. He touched Mom's and Dad's feet as a sign of respect, hugged me tightly, handed me the parrot's cage, and left for the airport with Dad in the cab. My second year of medical school had begun. I brought my parrot cage with me to London, though I was still unsure what to name him. Finally, I settled on Buddy because he was such a lovable bird. People might have a pet parrot, but I had Buddy. I missed Daniel a lot, and that's why I spent so much time looking at Buddy. Once again, I found myself starting over, focusing on my studies, my friends, and of course, Buddy. But after 6 months, something happened that I never saw coming. Jack proposed to me. That day, I was in the campus cafe with all my friends when Jack just blurted out that he loved me. I didn't say a word. I was both surprised and confused. Later, I talked it over with Rachel. "Emma, we're not kids anymore. You have to grow up, think it through, and make the right decision," Rachel said. She was right. I needed to make a decision. I was over 18 by then, and I had the right to decide for myself. And Jack was a nice guy. So after 3 days of thinking, I gave him my answer. I said, yes. That meant he was officially my boyfriend. But after we started dating, I learned a lot more about Jack. His parents were divorced, and he lived with his uncle. He was also a talented singer, having won a state-level competition twice. So, just like in the movies, Jack and I became that typical couple. We shared drinks with 2 straws, watched movies like Love Actually and Spider-Man 2, and during lectures, we joked about the heart, its 4 chambers, ventricles, and how it related to love. I was wrapped up in my studies, my friends, and Jack. In the middle of it all, I forgot about Daniel. It wasn't until later that I realized he hadn't called me in over 3 months. I even wrote him a letter, but there was no reply. What was going on? Was he too busy with work? Or had living in Switzerland made him forget about us? I wondered if people really did change as time passed. I thought about it, but I couldn't figure it out. As Daniel had suggested, I looked at the parrot he gave me. I watched Buddy because I missed my brother. 7 months went by, and Daniel still hadn't called or written back. My parents and Aunt Maggie were all worried about him, and I listened to Buddy's chirping instead of Daniel's voice. One day, I was sitting in the college cafe, sipping coffee, when Jack surprised me again. "I want to break up, Emma," he said. "What?"
Why?
"What happened?" I asked, completely taken aback. "Nothing. I just don't want to do this anymore. Jack, I love you. I can't live without you. I even want to marry you. That's the problem, Emma. I don't want to marry anyone. Marriage is the end of everything. My parents' divorce showed me that. And recently, I've realized that love isn't real. It's just attraction that fades over time. It's better to end it now before it gets worse. I'm sorry, Emma. It's not your fault. It's all because of my parents." With that, he walked away, and I sat there, still sipping my coffee, which had gone cold. Just like that, he broke up with me. As a medical student, I knew all about the heart, but I couldn't figure out which part of it hurt so much when Jack left. I couldn't identify the chamber where the pain was supposed to filter through. Those days were the worst of my life. My roommate Rachel had gone home, and I was left alone in our dorm room, heartbroken but with no visible cracks for anyone to see. One day I got a call on the dorm's telephone. It was my dad, saying he and my mom were coming to visit me in London. I was overjoyed at the news, but just a few hours later, my happiness turned to sorrow. On their way from Manchester to London, their bus was involved in an accident with a truck. My mom and dad died in that crash, along with 15 other passengers. Was it bad luck for them or for me? I didn't know. It was bad for both, but for me it was devastating. 2 weeks passed and I couldn't stop crying. Aunt Maggie was left alone in Manchester, and I was here still in my dorm. I wrote to Daniel again, but there was still no reply. I miss my parents, I miss Jack, and I miss Daniel. I sat with Buddy, listening to his chirps. One day, as I listened to him chirp, I suddenly lost my temper. "What's wrong with you now? Are you unhappy with me too?" I snapped at Buddy. He went quiet for a couple of minutes, then started chirping again. My frustration boiled over. I grabbed the knife from my desk, the one I usually used for cutting fruit. But this time, with all the thoughts colliding in my head, Buddy's chirping was only making it worse. "So you're unhappy with me too? You won't stop chirping, huh? Well, I'll stop you for good," I said, pushing the knife into the cage. Buddy's chirping stopped. There was a deafening silence in the room. I looked down and saw the knife, now stained with blood. Buddy was dead. I had killed my beautiful parrot. Too many tragedies had happened to me. My boyfriend had left me, my parents had died, my brother was out of contact, and now the one last friend I had, my sweet parrot, was gone, killed by my own hands. She opened her handbag, and I saw the blood-stained knife. "See, Charles, this is the knife I used to kill my pretty parrot," she said. "So, what happened after that?" I asked. As time passed, things changed. I came to realize that we only have one life, and it's meant to be lived alone. There are so many people out there going through tragedies like mine, but they keep going. They keep living. God made other people to support us, but when they leave, it's because God believes we're strong enough to live without them. That's what I've learned to believe. I finished my medical degree and now work at St. Mary's Hospital in London. Every day, I see people begging us to save their lives. I may have lost my people, but I'm determined not to let others go through the same pain. I work every day to save others. A year ago, I visited Switzerland. My brother Daniel is there, happy with his wife and son. New people in his life took the place of the old ones. He had read all my letters but never replied. He was too busy living his new life. Aunt Maggie is still living in the memories of her late husband. As for me, I never fell in love again and I never married. Like Aunt Maggie said, there's no one like the first one, and I'm content with my memories. I was wrong to think I couldn't live without Jack. Now I realize I can live without anyone, except for oxygen. I've dedicated my life to making sure others get to keep theirs. I'm a doctor, and to some, that makes me like God. I've been through enough pain to last a lifetime, and I'm determined to spare others from that fate. That's my story. She finished, and I looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "Well, I'll definitely write a book about you," I said. "Good luck with that, Charles. Go publish your novels and make a name for yourself like J.K. Rowling," she said with a soft smile. "Can we meet again?" I asked. "There's no meeting like the first. Focus on my story, not me. Now, if you'll excuse me, my patients are waiting." With that, she waved goodbye and left the Starbucks. Today, I've come to understand life better. Life is meant for living, for ourselves. It's okay to enjoy time with friends, but when they leave, why do we let ourselves crumble? Missing people is natural, but only to a point. Life is like a river, constantly flowing toward the ocean. A vast, endless life of possibilities. So, believe in yourself and keep living.